Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Academy Awards and the recent winners. So, Monica Sandler is actually, she's going to be presenting, and she's a doctoral candidate at this in Cinema and Media Studies at UCLA, and she actually graduated with a bachelor's in Cinema Studies from NYU with a minor in history, and she also graduated later with a master's from NYU in Cinema Studies as well. On top of that, her dissertation at UCLA examines the history of the Academy Awards and going back to their founding. And through her writing and her research, she seeks to answer questions like, how did this event become one of the biggest award institutions in the world? How do we value an achievement of this nature? And what is the lasting historical impact of this event? So she's had 2 papers published in academic journals on issues of Oscar history, and she's presented on the Academy at multiple cinema and media studies conferences, and she's even been interviewed as an awards historical expert at outlets like time.com. So I've seen her resume, it's quite impeccable. She really is an expert in these things, so we're really glad to have her and to have her talking about the Academy Awards. So without further ado, Ms. Sandler.
So we're going to talk about the Oscars today, which is my personal favorite subject in the world. They're a very complex institution that is both really glamorous and also often very problematic. And so the goal of today is to have a really great conversation about what happened on Sunday. And what I'm going to present on is essentially giving us the tools to talk about why do movies win Best Picture, what does it even mean to win an Academy Award, and why does this institution exist in the first place? So I have, our pictures from some of the winners last night and Sunday night, and some of the activities that happened. So we have some of our big Oscar winners of the night. Spike Lee, who up until the end seemed like the happiest person in the room, and then was probably the angriest person in the room. Lady Gaga and her insane necklace, which I guess is the largest gold diamond on Earth and is the most expensive item ever worn on a red carpet now. The crown jewel, I guess, of Tiffany's that shows the type of glamour that comes out for the Academy Awards is you get, a huge star wearing the biggest diamond you can possibly imagine on Earth. So that was sort of the night that was. It was to respond to what people are saying. It was definitely a mixed bag in terms of response. So you have only 3 black women who ever won Oscars for anything other than acting. 2 of them just happened tonight. And so that was for production design and for costume design, both of which were for Black Panther. So there were record-setting moments at the awards this year. Then in response to the Best Picture winner of Green Book, you had Spike Lee saying, I thought it was courtside at the Garden, and the ref made a bad call. So he's a really big sports fanatic, and he referenced the nicest version of his feelings about the winner in that particular manner. This was later in the evening after when Green Book was announced as Best Picture. He proceeded to get up and leave the room because he's kind of angry. For any context behind that, the movie that won Green Book has a very similar subject matter to another movie that had beaten him 30 years ago, exactly for the movie dealer, I think. The other movie is called Driving Miss Daisy, and it was less about him losing and more about this film that he didn't feel represented African American representation the way he feels it should be in the contemporary era, being a movie that won Best Picture. And that's something that I hope we can talk about in terms, as we go through this, just talking about who actually is in the Academy, why do movies like this win, and then moving into our own feelings about why the movies won and what we would like to have seen come out of it. Beyond that, to expand on that, though the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, AMPAS there, shouldn't get too much credit for pulling a solid show out of a trash heap that remedied decisions leading up to it, and a few uncorrected voter errors, which is alluding to having a disagreeing opinion about the winner. The 91st Academy Awards proved to work out just fine. So he's saying, and essentially the last one was just saying, who knew that a hostless Oscars might turn out to be a good idea? So there was a lot of controversy going into the awards this year, perhaps more than usual. This year, I think that went a little bit too fast. I'll play it again with this because I don't know how to GIF things correctly. But you can see Chadwick Boseman's response to Green Book winning, which I feel like says it all. So the controversies this year were the Academy announces a popular film category and then retracts the statement because there's a lot of backlash to it. Kevin Hart is asked to be host of the Oscars, then steps down amidst controversy about his previous homophobic tweets. Then the Academy announces a selection of awards that are not going to be, they're going to be given out during the commercial breaks. There's a bunch of backlash, and then they retract their statement again. And so the Academy Awards go for the first time since 1989 without a host. And then Green Book wins Best Picture, which is the new level of controversy. So as we dive into some of the history, I thought I would start with what happened last time the Oscars didn't have a host. It's pretty infamous. So this is Rob Lowe and Snow White opening the Academy Awards ceremony, and I have a clip, but I have to switch. I have to switch because it was like 11 minutes long. Here's a shortened, abbreviated version that the Hollywood Reporter had as a good reference point. Apparently, we have to watch an ad before we can look at it now. But it was sort of infamously terrible, this particular award ceremony, particularly because of this opening. So here we go.
Rob Lowe.
But you said goodbye to Clumpy and Sleepy.
So that's the last time that they had. That was the last time that they went hostless, and it was an utter disaster, hence the reason why the Academy is particularly concerned about doing that. I personally think that it turned out pretty all right. I thought that Tina Fey, Maya Rudolph, and Amy Poehler gave a funnier opening than I'd seen in years. So it worked out a lot better than this did, at least last time. So the goals of this presentation are to talk about what are the Oscars, why do they exist, what is the Academy, and what is its function within the American film industry today, and then how do we consider Oscars' role in the entertainment industry, just more generally. So what does it mean to win an Oscar? To everyone in the audience, why do you think people care about them? Why do people freak out when they win awards? Why does the entire back half of the year into February get so focused on the Oscars? I'm asking you guys. Yeah.
I guess it holds some sort of prestige. Like, if a director gets an Oscar, they're probably going to get hired to make more movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
One more thing is international films also, they look forward to it. I think they look at it as the highest achievement, and that's because they are accredited by the actual people of Hollywood, so they acknowledge them. So that's one of the biggest reasons. Even I think better than the Cannes, and I don't know about that, but it seems to have more drama than the Cannes and the BAFTAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like recognition for the work of the entertainment industry at large, but also I always see it as like the Oscars and other award ceremonies as being also like kind of on the tail end of a political moment, so that also like to me has political representation within the speeches and that kind of thing, and it also kind of shows us where we are in the era and like what people are watching and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
They probably can attract more people to see the films and like get more revenues or box office.
Yeah, so all of those answers are absolutely correct. So the Oscars, part of their prestige factor is one that they've just existed the longest. They first formed in 1929, so they just outdate everyone. They outdate Cannes, they outdate BAFTA, in terms of film festivals, in terms of all of that stuff. So they're just like the premier original founding achievement in film. And that's part of what keeps them being so significant, is that they just have always been the most important film award. And what essentially is supposed to be why the Oscar achievement is so significant to people is the structure of what the Academy is. So the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences is supposed to be this industry club, basically, for Hollywood's like the absolute best. So essentially, people are nominated to be into the Academy as members in and of themselves, and that's supposed to be an achievement that reflects like you are the best of the best in the industry. And then by voting for the Oscars, you're getting the Oscar from the people who are the best in the industry. That, however, as we continue to look at the makeup of the industry, can lead to very, very problematic results in terms of there being a complete lack of representation and diversity that ended up occurring within the organization, and the leaders within there are continuing to try and resolve that particular issue. But we'll get into the exact statistics of it later on in my presentation. Beyond that, when we're talking about the Oscars, I have a couple of quotes from people who were instrumental in the development of them as a ceremony. So this is Frank Capra. He was president of the Academy from 1935 to 1939, and his statement was, "The Academy Award is the most valuable but least expensive item of worldwide public relations ever invented by any industry." So as was noted about, publicizing movies and publicizing acting performances and all that stuff, you win an Oscar, and that's supposed to be a good selling point for the success of your film, that you can release it wider in terms of box office, you'll make more money. And that's the simplest mindset behind why is there this crazy award season going on every year, is that there are a certain type of film that are only able to market themselves through going through the award season process and potentially winning. So you have a movie like First Man this year that didn't end up getting awards consideration, that sort of fizzled and did not make as much money as it was expected to, especially since it was the follow-up to the director of La La Land. And then you have something like Green Book, which has been in the public eye now for months on end because it's consistently been going through the award season. And things like Black Klansman, which came out I think in August, and is still in conversation despite being released a lot earlier in the year, as well as Black Panther, which was out like March last year, almost a year ago. But it gives the ability for there to be a continual publicity conversation about particular movies. The second quote I'm going to use is much more problematic, I guess, or indicative of how the structures of the Academy can have issues. So this is from Louis B. Mayer, who is the head of MGM and is semi-credited with the idea for the Academy Awards. The legend of how it came together was that at the founding banquet for the ceremony, he was sitting around with a group of people, like writing down on a napkin ideas for giving out trophies. That's the legend of it. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was a collective effort, but he gets more credit for creating the award than anyone else. So his quote is, "I found the best way to handle employees was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cuffs and awards, they'd kill themselves to produce what I wanted. That's why the Academy Award was created." So that is like the, most cynical expression, I think, of talking about what the Oscars do and what they function as. But it's this idea that, in terms of individuals wanting achievement for their work, and that type of recognition can spur a lot of focus and motivation within the industry. And I think that if you look at the level of emotion that's welled up with people when they win the Oscars, that continues to be the thing today. Like, this is the ultimate achievement that they feel they can get for the work that they're doing, the work that they love doing. So we're talking about what is the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. And as I've kind of hinted in terms of its founding, as a trade organization, as sort of the Hollywood's best and brightest institution, and then the award ceremony that emerged from that. The Academy was founded in 1929, and it's kind of in the middle of two particular moments in the industry. And so I have a reasons why document, which I'll read a little bit from, though it's a little bit hard for me to see from here. But here it says, "We can take aggressive action in meeting outside attacks that are unjust. We can promote harmony and solidarity among our membership and among our different branches. We can reconcile any internal internal differences that may exist or arise, we can adopt such ways and means as are proper to further the welfare and protect the honor and good repute of our profession. We can encourage and improve the advancement of the arts and sciences of our profession by the interchange of constructive ideas and by awards of merit for distinctive achievement. So they've just created this organization and they're trying to get people to sign up for it. What does any of that mean? Essentially, the Academy is founded for two reasons, very much in the context of what was going on in 1927. So, in 1926, the lower division workforce, technicians, editors, electricians, all unionized successfully into an organization called IATSE, which was the head theaters technicians group that had existed, I think, for decades previously already at that point. So essentially there was this movement of creative labor, like actors, writers, and directors, to form their own guilds. And there was a response from producers being like, that's not what we want. We don't want them having complete creative freedom and creative control and fighting for the rights and all that stuff. So we'll do an alternative fake union. So the Academy's first original design had this conciliations forum where workers could hear and file complaints, but they couldn't collective bargain, they couldn't, strike, they couldn't do anything to fight back, but they could now, if they were having an issue with their employer, they had a forum where they could say something, and previously that didn't exist in any way, shape, or form. So that's the first thing that's going on that motivates the Oscars, and kind of fits within the context of what Mr. Louis B. Meyer was talking about in terms of why the awards exist, and a labor relations issue in and of itself, because part of what the Academy's existence was about was this appeasing the workers situation. The second reason is for public relations in and of itself. In 1927, this was the same year as Hollywood's Hays Office created their first censorship measures. Hollywood was facing a ton of backlash as sort of this amoral community, that movies were filled with sex and sin, and Hollywood employees were salacious, and loose women were running around Hollywood and things like that. So there's this big PR backlash going on for Hollywood, and the Academy's purpose, in part, is to basically make Hollywood look better, represent our community in the best possible way that can be imagined. So the Academy Awards in that respect fit within the framework of these two ideas. You have this ultimate night of Hollywood glamour, celebrities all in one room, and people at home being fascinated with what's happening, just for the same reason that everyone's fascinated with celebrity culture. And you have this forum that makes workers really, really happy because they're getting achievement. And so even though the Conciliations Forum goes out the window by 1937, most of Hollywood hates it unequivocally by 1933, as organizations like the Screen Actors Guild and the Directors Guild form. But those founding principles, I still think, hold to what when we're thinking contemporarily about what the Oscars do and what their function are in the industry. And that's why I wanted to bring up the very beginning of what the Oscars were as we think about what they continue to be in this day and age. So the first ceremony is held in 1929. We have our class of winners, the May 16th, 1929, so we're coming up on the 90th birthday of the ceremony in May. We just had the 91st ceremony, and they were this small little event that was a part of the Academy's annual membership meeting, and they just sort of gave out trophies in the middle of it. And it was maybe like 10 minutes of and everyone already knew that they were winning, but it was like, hey, come up and get your trophy, yay. The trophy was made by Cedric Gibbons, who was a production designer at MGM. And the name Oscar there are a number of sort of places where they claim it comes from. The accurate one that I know of is that the head of the Academy's sort of internal operations was a woman named Margaret Herrick from the 30s for decades after that. But she said that it comes from basically her saying that the trophy looked like her Uncle Oscar. There's also the claim that Betty Davis said that it looked like her ex-husband Oscar from the back, that the butt looked the same, but I don't know which one is. Generally speaking, the Margaret Herrick one is said to be more accurate. Anyways, this trophy is formed. It's a small little ceremony that on paper looks like nothing happened. Yet, I think there's an immediate response where if you slap an advertisement on a movie that says Best Picture winner or Best Actress winner, suddenly people want to go see the movie again, even if it was out previously for quite a while. To the point where by the second ceremony you had a small partial broadcast that went into the radio broadcast of the ceremony that presented about 10 minutes of what was going on during the second awards ceremony. There was already a public interest for that type of forum. And they have a short form broadcast from then until 1933 when the organization hits a particularly rough patch from the Great Depression and they don't really have any money to do pretty much anything at that point, which changes later on. So, you have some pictures of sort of Hollywood's biggest night and the development of the ceremony, and up until the mid-40s, really, the awards are taking place as a banquet for membership. It's a part of their annual event that they would have just sort of a dinner, and they would give out awards, and they would also talk about larger issues that were going on within the organization and things like that. So the first version of the ceremony was very much for the people in the room rather than for audiences at home. There was a lot of interest in it, but there's sort of a transformation from one moment to the next, and I'm gonna, for time's sake, the moment that I think really transforms the awards into this public forum that we're thinking about it as in terms of today is during World War II, which is when you start seeing a full live broadcast, not just to people in the States, but also globally out to the troops. And you start having a host, Bob Hope. Previously, the person who'd been hosting was the president of the Academy at the time, and it was just sort of them joking around with their insider friends. And now you have the sort of face of USO shows hosting the ceremony, and you have song and dance numbers, and it kind of takes the format of what we see today, only in essentially radio show format. And as the radio broadcast goes into play, it moves from being a banquet to, by 1944, being at the Pantages Theater. So it becomes a ceremony for individuals at home, and it becomes a lot more tedious for those in the room. But that's kind of the transformation of the ceremony, which I think climaxes when you have the television broadcast, which I'm just going to show the very, very beginning of it, just to kind of imply what they were selling when they first made it a TV broadcast, which was 1953, the 25th ceremony. If it will let me.
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences 25th Annual Academy Awards. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking west on Hollywood Boulevard. Perhaps population changes have swung the motion picture industry away from this historic street somewhat, but it will always remain a little bit in nostalgia and memory, something like 42nd Street and Broadway. Here are the stands, and there is the marquee. Down there in front of the theater, a group of people still coming in, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, Margin Gower champion, Leslie Caron and her husband, Mr. Hormel. Here in the Pantages tonight is the world's most glamorous audience, nearly 3,000 strong, all waiting to see the Oscars handed out, and almost all are either rooting for friends or keeping their fingers crossed for themselves. Perhaps if you look closely in there, you can see some of your favorites at the screen. Most of the nominees will be present. Some, of course, as you've heard, are in New York. I see Merle Oberon sitting down there just to the right corner of the screen.
President of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Mr. Charles Brackett.
Perspective of what it looked like. Charles Brackett basically comes out and says, "We're the Academy, here's your host, Bob Hope," and then he does the opening monologue, and it's essentially the same exact format that we have today, but this is the first time you're seeing the awards on TV, and so much of what they're talking about for the ceremony is the sort of novelty of like, you get to watch all your favorite celebrities at home. Bob Hope makes a joke about how everyone at home needs to be wearing their tuxedos because Audrey Hepburn's going to judge you if you're in your sweatpants, that kind of thing. So it's about the novelty of seeing your favorite stars broadcast right into your home and the sort of transformation of the event into the ultimate Hollywood spectacle. And Hollywood's biggest night really forms once you have the television broadcast in place. Academy Awards and PR Backlash. So these are both things from the 1940s, but they make look very similar to some of what the headlines you may have seen in the past couple of weeks, maybe even on Monday morning. The Oscars gets himself into more trouble, bad PR, public relations decreed in 5 majors, walk out of the Oscars. That was really dumb in that the first time a British film won Best Picture in 1949, which was Hamlet by Laurence Olivier. All of the studios then who were funding the ceremony withdrew all their money because they rewarded a British film and they weren't someone that put in money. So, but you have bad public relations decried because they rewarded the British film. Oh, the horror. So you've got Hamlet there when Olivier's holding his Oscar. And then, in terms of scandal, the first Oscar scandal that I'm aware of is in 1934, and it's when Miss Betty Davis there that is snubbed for an Oscar for her work in Of Human Bondage. And the main issue that happened here was that she basically raised hell with her publicist that this was completely unjust and that there was a rigged system. And if you're wondering why the Academy hires an accounting team, Ms. Price Waterhouse, which is now infamous for screwing up a couple of years ago, it is because Betty Davis raised hell over not getting nominated, and they decided, because there were claims of injustice, to have an accounting firm do the votes rather than doing them internally, because that would make it seem more objective and like there weren't any biases going on there. So essentially, the Academy's been riddled with scandal pretty much for as long as they've existed, particularly once the unions came into play and they hated their labor relations forum. For the 30s, when they just formed, they were also one of the most hated organizations in Hollywood. So they've pretty much always been controversial in some ways. And some of their Oscar picks themselves have always been controversial. Before we go totally contemporary, I wanted to note the context of the last time that there was a massive changeover in Academy Awards voters. So part of what's happened in the past few years was there was the Oscars So White campaign that emerged in part because of a lack of representation in the acting categories, but also, as you'll see in a second, a lack of representation amongst the membership within the organization. So the previous time where they changed and reorganized what their voting body looked like occurred in part for similar reasons connected to equity, diversity, and inclusion, as happened contemporarily. So this is in reference to the 40th Academy Awards, April 10th, 1968, which I would say is 1 year where most people would conclude that this was a time when the Academy got it right. That night, a movie called In the Heat of the Night won, which is about sort of racial tensions during the contemporary period of time. And the main thing that happened that night was that the Academy, 2 days previously, had been the funeral for Martin Luther King Jr. And they had postponed the ceremony because of that, and then you have this movie that wins that is a conversation about racial tensions in America. So you have this moment where this really triumphant. That being said, it's a total coincidence because voting ballots were in, the ceremony was supposed to be 2 days earlier, and it was moved back, but it was this really triumphant moment. The following year, you get a movie called Oliver, which had a massive backlash of we thought they were getting contemporary, we thought they were being relevant, and now, how pointless is the Oscars? Which might be a similar conversation we're hearing with something like Green Book, or we've heard with other award winners like The Artist, that are were deemed to be a bit out of touch, that kind of thing. So essentially, starting in 1967, they had been getting this level of backlash about them being out of touch and that the voters were really old. Under the system of becoming an Academy member until recently, you received lifetime membership once you're asked and invited to join the organization, and that means you can vote. But if you have lifetime membership, that means that generally speaking, the voting body will end up being on the elderly side because they're not inviting as many people to join every year as there are people who aren't dying, to put it in the simplest way. So from that, they basically restructured and purged some of their elderly voters from still being Academy members, but not having privileges to vote anymore. And so it emerges, they're sort of dealing with a controversy beforehand of being out of touch. They have a really great cultural moment, and then they backtrack the next year. And that's really what leads to the implementation of we need to change everything around. And so once they adjust voters, you can see these were the awards in the 1970s. The following year you get Midnight Cowboy, an X-rated movie, so you're getting a lot more scandalous than you've ever seen the Academy really do before. But really, some really iconic movies like both of The Godfathers, Rocky, The Deer Hunter are winning Best Picture. There are also some movies in there like Patton and The Sting and Ordinary People that I think people wouldn't feel necessarily like they're totally classics in the same way. So there are some that they get right and there's some that they get wrong. But there's definitely a growth in terms of what they're doing. They're no longer rewarding something like Oliver, which is a kind of out-of-touch musical. And they're rewarding, contemporary cultural moment films. The Godfather is still considered the most important film of the year, and oh my gosh, it won Best Picture. What a novelty. What are we going to say about this year? Are we really going to say that The Green Book was the most important film of the year when we look back, 30 years from now, 40? This is the 70s, it's a long time ago. So this is the context I wanted you guys to think about in terms of how they became what they are and what they continue to be today. So what does the Academy actually do? They give out shiny trophies every year, and we all watch the ceremony, but there's a ton of conversation every year about, the Academy's doing this and it's so terrible, or this is a problem, or they're not representing the working bodies, but what do they actually do besides give out shiny trophies? They mostly do film appreciation. They do special events throughout the year, film screenings and things like that, and their biggest spaces are in conservation. So they have two of the best paper materials and film archives for film-related research in the entire world. Absolutely fantastic, but that's where a lot of their resources are going to, is they're not doing much of industry trade things, they're preserving film history, basically. Additionally, they're in the process of opening up a museum, which has been in the works for an incredibly long time. I have seen documentation going back to the 30s where they're proposing the idea of a museum, so, and they're alleging it's going to open later this year. I don't know if that will happen, we will see. But in theory, in terms of what they do, there's this one thing that they're saying is going to be a new big function for them, but they're not really, aside from putting on this ceremony every year, they're essentially, they send out ballots and then they report the results, and they send out ballots again and then they present trophies to how the membership body voted. Most members would not consider themselves active participants in the Academy, but they get screeners and they watch the movies and they vote. But do they do anything else for the organization? Unless you're you're one of the heads of a department, not really. And so that's just sort of an emphasis on how kind of irrelevant they are, and yet they get all of the industry's behavior kind of thrust upon them. But given their founding role as a PR organization, that was kind of built into what they were supposed to do. So people being more aggressive at the Academy is people being less aggressive at the policies and behaviors of the industry. And that's kind of, I think, I like to say that they continue to have the function that they had when they were founding. So, who's the Academy? And this is what I've been hinting at for quite a while. So in 2016, at the time when the Oscar So White movement first began, the Academy was 91% white and 9% non-white. Yeah, it was really bad. It was really bad. And then the Academy is broken up by branches, so all of the directors are in one branch, all the actors are in one branch. And pretty much all of the branches of the Academy are reflective of what the awards are. So there's an actor's branch, there's a cinematographer's branch, there's an editor's branch, and then they all give out a trophy connected to their own branch. So in terms of the worst, directors, 9% female, 91% male, yeah. Executives, 2% not white, which is really depressing, and cinematographers, 5% female, which is the lowest percentage of lacking gender diversity of the group of them. So this has been the rates of increase. Their goal is to get to 50-50 with male-female. I think it would be more across the board rather than in each individual branch in the next couple of years. And so the rate that they're going at right now, in terms of increases in female membership, in 2015, you had 25% female in the entirety of the organization, 27% in 2016, 28% in 2017, and now we're at 39% in terms of the new class that came in last year that were invited for membership. And then they're also increasing in diversity. This year's new class was 30% people of color. So their goal is to try and reorganize what the academy looks like as an institution, and hopefully that will lead to more diverse and more relevant choices from within the organization in terms of what wins, what doesn't win, what gets nominated, and who's represented at the ceremony. So keeping that in mind, I want to additionally look at, how do you actually win an Oscar? What are the logistics of the process? So right here, this is a document this is from a couple of years ago specifically, but it basically is the rule book that every voter gets before they vote, that says how things are chosen, how things are picked. So for the nomination process, every branch votes for the nominees. They do it by a ranking system, so they pick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're the choices that they think should get nominated, and from that, the movies and the individuals that are ranked highest, everyone votes for Best Picture, of course, then are nominated based off of the ranking system. Then for the awards winners, once the nominations are out, everyone votes across the board. So, and this is something I've heard, is that there are 2 different sound awards, sound editing and sound mixing, and you're asking actors to understand what sound editing and sound mixing is, and frequently you have a lot of voters who don't understand what they actually are, because everyone votes in some of those categories. There are a couple of exceptions to those specific rules. For the documentary, foreign film, and short subject categories, you have to attend screenings to prove that you've seen all of the movies in order to be able to vote on them. That way you don't have the potential of favoritism or people who have no idea what the movie is just voting on things at random. So this is a sample ballot from 2011. You can see the movies that were nominated. This was the year that The Artist won, not my favorite movie, but you would go in and you would rank the movies 1 to however many there were that were nominated that year. So the movie you liked the least, you put last. The movie you liked the most, you put first. So the movie that wins Best Picture essentially is the movie that has the highest average amongst these rankings. So statistically speaking, if you are a movie that is really, really divisive, meaning you have a ton of people voting it first and a ton of people voting it last, even if you have the most #1 votes, you are still likely to lose because you're divisive. But if you're a movie potentially that's hovering in 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, you're more likely to win, even if you don't have as many #1s as other movies. So it's favoring consensus rather than maybe a more controversial movie that some people think is utterly brilliant and other people are not handling as well. So that can lead to, kind of maybe fluffier films winning rather than controversial films winning. Additionally, with the Best Picture nominations, and I just had to figure this out myself exactly, so at the current moment, they have a guaranteed 5 nominees, and then we'll have up to 10 nominees. And the way that anything that is above, in the ranking system, above 5, if you get 5% of the voting block votes for your film at #1, you get nominated, up until 10. So this year there were 8 films nominated. That means those films, however they were ranked, at least got 5% of individuals voting at #1 amongst the voting pool. It can be really confusing when you try and figure out the math for that. So additionally, in terms of our understanding of what just happened with the award season was, there's a kind of process that films go through until they reach the Oscar ceremony. So I have pictures here from Venice Film Festival this year, which more so than any other film festivals, they launched the campaigns of movies like Star is Born, The Favorite, and Roma, all of whom became pretty big contenders the ceremony this year. There are other film festivals essentially seen as being the campaign launching points for the ceremony, starting essentially in September with events like Telluride Film Festival, Toronto, and then Venice, essentially this big PR push to get everyone out to find interest in the movies. And then it sort of moves through the process of the season, through Critics Awards and kind of rankings of best movies of the year, and then the starting point to the full award season is seen as the Golden Globes. Then there's the Guild Awards and the BAFTA Awards. And there are actually campaign rules in place for what you can do for the ceremony. So prior to the nominations, you're allowed to have these big events to target voters, but you can't be targeting voters individually. And after the ceremony comes to place, you need to be soliciting advertisements. You can put up billboards if you've been wandering around LA. You've seen 1,000 for your consideration posters, but you can't start having your own individual mixers being like, isn't Netflix great? Vote for Roma. But you can have Academy events where they screen the movies, and then they can have all of the cast there, and they can individually schmooze people who are at those events, that kind of thing. Part of why they're so strict about this is that individual Harvey Weinstein, who has caused many problems, as we have learned. In the 1990s, there's sort of the infamous case of Shakespeare in Love winning Best Picture. People nodding their heads right now. So a lot of how that win occurred over Saving Private Ryan was that Harvey Weinstein was individually targeting voters, calling them individually, encouraging them to watch this film, and then additionally targeting elderly voters specifically, holding special events at retirement communities that had large groups of Hollywood retirees and Academy members. Yeah. And so you had a bunch of people who being, really fixated on it in a way they hadn't been in a long time. So yeah, they vote for it because like Harvey Weinstein is losing them. So the Academy put in place a bunch of rules being like, no, you can't do that. Like this, we need to have some element of fairness. So clearly he was a very problematic individual in a lot of ways. So we're talking about the award season and the process. This is sort of me beginning to wrap up. We have predicting awards that the precursors to the Oscars ceremony that will give you an indicator of what might win. So which of these do you think is the best predictor of what's going to win Best Picture? So you've got a Golden Globes. Anything else you think might be? BAFTAs. SAG Awards. Okay, so I've got this here. The Producers Guild Awards are actually #1. And if you look at the divide this year, there's Peter Farrelly winning the Producers Guild Award, and this was him winning at the Golden Globes. So the main thing that is so key about the Producers Guild Awards is that they follow the same ranking system as the Academy. So they're voting in the same way that the Academy voters are. Even if the producers branch is only one specific part of them, they're still voting the same way. You can see a little bit of what their patterns are. However, the main thing to keep in mind with most of these ceremonies is, with the exception of the Golden Globes, all of them feature Academy, have groups that have the same overlap with Academy voters, that kind of thing. So the SAG Awards can be a really good predictor of what's going to happen in the acting categories, but they're not as good as picking Best Picture with their ensemble. As are the Directors Guild with the Directors category, things like that. You can go down the line to the other guilds. Cinematography has their own event, that kind of thing. But the main thing to note about the Golden Globes, which is what you pointed to, they have only one voter that is an overlap with the Academy. So part of how they are good at predicting, though, is that they have two branches. They have the comedy category and they have the drama category. So you have two possible options that they put forward potentially to win. So that doubles their odds of being correct, basically. So on that note, I hope we can open this up to a conversation about the Oscars with this new context in mind. And I have a couple of my key takeaways from the night, but I'm excited to hear what you guys thought and your reactions to it. So my four were the diversity and representation of the ceremony, Roma, and Netflix quest for Oscar glory throughout the season, Green Book as a controversial Best Picture winner, and just a basic statement of like, maybe we don't need to have a host at the Oscars going forward. That's just my opinion. So that's my presentation, but let's chat about the Oscars, I guess. I don't know how to open it up or anything, but
yeah, we could
Yeah.
like do something.
yeah.
So I've been seeing, actually, near where I work, I see all of these for your consideration posters, and it's always boggled my mind, because it's not like I'm voting for the Oscars, so why are those ads helpful?
They're up basically because the most people who are driving around, the most voters in the world are driving around this area, and they'll see those signs. So they can't individually target voters, but if they have signs up that say for your consideration, there are potential eyes that will see that advertisement. For the same reason, like if you read trade outlets online, like Variety or Deadline, you'll get a ton of for your consideration ads, and I'm like, I'm an Academy voter, and my data probably says that, but like, that's who's likely to be looking here, so they just spool all their ads into
How
their
many voters
location.
are there?
Now about between 7,000 and 8,000. It was a lot lower before the new membership policies, but they've been really expanding membership the past couple of years. Yes?
How do they choose the voters?
So there are three ways technically. There are 3 ways to join the Academy. One, the easiest way is get nominated for an Oscar. You guaranteed Academy membership, you get nominated for an Oscar. 2, you're invited by 2 peers within that branch of the Academy. So if you have individuals within the industry who are like, you're an incredible part of our how we're developing, and you're a great sound mixer, I'm going to sponsor you to become part of the Academy. You get a co-sponsor, and you can become an Academy member. The third way, which is part of how expansion has happened so rapidly, is that the leader of your branch can nominate people. So the Board of Governors in it themselves can just nominate people. And that's a lot of how membership's been expanding this year, is them, in a way they haven't previously, having the members of the Board of Governors picking and choosing individuals to be added to the organization. Yeah?
So when you look at like all of the films that come out in a given year, and you look at how much smaller the pool of actual nominations is that because the voters themselves choose what the nominations are going to be, or is that, do films have to like put themselves up for consideration for nominations? Like, how does that work?
So films have to put themselves up for consideration. So if you had a total dud movie at the beginning of the year and no one liked it, like, they're probably not submitting screeners. But so, yeah, so they put forward, studios across Hollywood, across the world, put forward suggestions, and there are possible nominees from their company. They then issue screeners to any individual who's involved in the organization, so they can watch their movie from home if they want to. They have a little mark on them, so you can't be trading them around. If they're found anywhere else, they'll know that it was an award screener. And they're the only, prior to the Harvey Weinstein scandal and them outing Roman Polanski for his previous behavior, the only person who had ever been kicked out of the Academy was someone who had been caught with their screeners being sold on the internet. But that's essentially how it's the choice of individuals. The same reason why sometimes you have a movie or an actor winning Best Supporting Actress and you're like, this is totally a lead part, that kind of thing, or particularly this year where I looked at the stats on The Favorite. Olivia Colman, of the 3 leads in the movie, has the second most screen time. Emma Stone is technically the lead of the movie in terms of the amount of screen time, but Olivia Colman, who is great, just won an Oscar, but she was technically not the lead of the movie. But they get to pick the category they want to be in too, so they can go, okay, this person's more likely to win a supporting. We're gonna put them for consideration in supporting, and we're gonna put this person in consideration for best actor, lead, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I was just gonna like leave this open for discussion so we can like maybe all add to this, but I was wondering what people thought of the popular category that was added earlier in the year, because I had mixed feelings about it. Like in theory, if she mentioned this, but like it was like March or something. It was really early on in the year. It was right after Black Panther came out that the Oscars said that they were gonna be putting forward a new category, like the popular movie. So I was just wondering what people thought of that, if that was a good idea, because they like very soon after got rid of that idea pretty quickly. So I don't know, just wondering.
Yeah, what did you guys think?
So are you suggesting that was in response to the popularity of Black Panther and the idea that the Academy wanted to recognize what it had achieved, but not necessarily allow it for, by giving it the most popular movie, take away from giving it something more substantial like Best Picture or Best, acting or, producing or acting. Like, is that what you're suggesting, like, based on how close in proximity it was to Black Panther?
No, well, I mean, I guess the reason that it came out, or I didn't read the statement, but I guess I had heard that the reason that category had come out was because, like, to leave the Best Picture award open for maybe more controversial films, or not maybe controversial, but maybe it's not popular, but it's still like it's a good movie, or it just means a lot, or it's like I don't know, it's like a cultural phenomenon or something, but it's not popular, but it's still like should be given, it was the Best Picture. So like if you introduce the popular category, it kind of gets to filter out the kind of those, like Black Panther wouldn't have been nominated for Best Picture, would have been most popular or something. Yeah. I was wondering why they got rid of that anyways.
I can comment on a couple of things connected to it. One, technically speaking, the current Best Picture category is the popular film category. The first Academy Awards had two Best Picture categories. One was commercial film, basically, and the other one was art film. They got rid of that after that, and they eliminated that category, which is why there are technically two Best Pictures from the first year, but everyone always talks about the first one being a movie called Wings rather than a movie called Sunrise, even though both of them were technically up for two different categories. So technically speaking, the category that exists right now is the popular film category. But I think the context from what I had read about that particular moment was that the Academy Awards ratings have consistently been down in a number of years. And one thing to keep in mind about the things that the Academy does that I noted, which are all non-for-profit enterprises mostly connected to education, 90% of their funding comes from the broadcast and the commercial revenue. So if ratings are down, they are unable to fund themselves, basically. They're trying to open a museum, so they're particularly in a state of desperation about that in terms of trying to get funding to make sure that they can actually open it. So a lot of the behavior that you may see happening is like, oh, if we have a popular film category, maybe we can get more people to watch. In particular, and this is where maybe some of the sketchiness might come into play, my understanding from reading trade articles and Variety was that prior to that announcement, they had had a meeting with ABC, Disney, who has the rights to the Academy Awards indefinitely, about the issues that they think would make the ceremony better and have higher ratings. And they suggested things like, the ceremony needs to be shorter, why don't we have awards during commercial breaks, which is why the other thing that people really freaked out over. And why don't we have a popular film category, because then you have only blockbusters. You also could argue that that may very likely feature a lot of Disney movies. So there is some sketchiness attached to that, but a lot of the ideas were being facilitated by ABC executives over the planning and the ratings issue with the ceremony, and the Academy kind of feeling beholden to that because that's the only way they continue to function as a non-for-profit organization. Yeah.
So sort of off of that, I know that there's been a lot of talk about like how their ratings have been down and how that is a super big concern for them and the future of the Academy Awards. But just given their really extended history, it seems unlikely that from the start their ratings would always have gone up and up and up and up continuously. So is this like current panic sort of new, or have there been other periods where it's been comparable and so them freaking out now is maybe not as big of an issue as?
It's not new, is what I'll say. The big thing, one of the big issues I kind of alluded to earlier. So ever since they've had a television broadcast, they've successfully been able to fund themselves. So this is the first time the television broadcast is failing as a forum. But essentially, up until the television broadcast, they were funded by production companies in Hollywood, basically sending the money, and some membership dues, but it was never enough. In 1949, which is what I mentioned, was when a British film wins Best Picture, producers then say, we're not giving you money anymore, because one, they were in their own crisis in terms of that's kind of the end of the studio era because of some antitrust trade laws that were going on at the time, and they're like, we can't afford it, and you're not even rewarding our movies, you're not a promotional item for us anymore. For the following several years, they do things like, they're the first time that they make their own products, they like lend out their brand to brand of watch called the Academy Award watch, one of which I own. It's like, it's pretty cool. I was going to bring it, but it's really delicate, so I didn't. Sorry. But, and that ends in a lawsuit, which is part of why they don't really lend their brand out to things. Until recently, I have an Academy Award water bottle. They have a store right now, and they're merchandising, and they haven't done that since the lawsuit over their watch that happened in the 50s. But pretty much up until then, they, for the following year from 1950 to 1953, they basically like a month before the ceremony are consistently like, we're not going to have a ceremony, we can't afford it, to producers, and they bail them out every year. And then in 1953, when the television broadcast, January of 1953, there is not a television broadcast being planned. But you get a statement from producers being like, no, we're not funding you this year. And they're trying to figure out what to do, and they go to advertisers, and they sign with NBC, and they're able to get a really lucrative deal in terms of revenue. And this is the first time they're able to function independently, where they don't need to get funds from economic forums that may have very specific interests at play in terms of what they want to see win, that kind of thing. But ratings-wise, they've never dealt with this before, and I think some of the chaos of what they're doing right now is very reflective of what they were kind of doing when they were in the same space and then going back to the 1950s. Yeah.
I was just wondering, well, can a film have like a supporting actor? There are like multiple actors, and can a film have like 2 nominees for the same category? Is that allowed?
Yeah, they can have 2 different actors nominated in the same categories. There were some this year. There were 2 nominees for The Favorite. Yeah, but there can also be, individuals can be nominated. I think you could potentially be nominated twice for Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor if you were in 2 movies that were really I don't think that's ever happened, but you have had people in Actor and Supporting Actor in 1 year. And there have also been a lot of occurrences where you have 2 leads in the same category, particularly in the lead actor category. They may split the vote and then no one wins, which is part of why they tend to separate people up between lead and supporting, even if they weren't actually lead and supporting, just so that way that doesn't happen. There are a couple of like infamous cases of that, where people split the vote and then someone who wasn't part of like an iconic performance that year ended up winning. Yeah.
I have a comment and then a suggestion. The comment has to do with the ratings. Now, I can't remember if I've ever watched this program, but I know I've never watched it in the last 40 years. But from what I read, in recent years, this program has been very politicized. And I gather that it's not just sort of people all over the spectrum having fun with each other, but that it's all on one side of the spectrum. And it seems to me that if they care about their ratings, it's rather silly to alienate half the population of the country. And I would assume that does. The suggestion, I'd be interested in hearing what students think about the winners this year and whether they agree with the decisions that were made or disagree with them. And then I think that you might help us reflect on that kind of, if there are disagreements, it might reflect different opinions as to what the criteria should be, and what some of the, should it be something that has broad popular appeal, or should it be something that's just artistically superior, or should it be in accord with, as I think you were suggesting, I don't know whether for yourself or just in terms of what they were trying to do, should it be some kind of social objective? And I'm sure there are other criteria, but I'd be interested in hearing what some of the students' opinions are on the choices that were made this year.
Yeah, what did you guys think? Yeah.
It was about Green Book that it threw me off a little bit. So Green Book had 2 really lead actors, Mahershala Ali and I don't know the other guy's name. Yeah. So Lorenzo was put into Best Actor, and Ali was put into Supporting Actor. Mm-hmm. Even though in the movie they were I'd say they were both leads. Like, they were on, somebody can disagree with me on this, but I'd say they're both leads. Mm-hmm. But the interesting is, even though I felt that, and again, this is open to disagreement, that Lorenzo what I liked his performance more because he was in a category that was more difficult to win because of like the other people in that category. He didn't win. Is that common?
Yes. That's really common. Really, but they put people in the category they think they're most likely to win because they have control over it. That kind of thing. Yeah.
I think one reason they separate one into best actor and the other for supporting actor is because they don't want themselves to compete against each other. They want to sort of like increase the film's chance of winning as many awards as possible. I would say like something like that. Because like I think a couple of years ago when 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, they nominated both of the actors for the supporting actor category. I personally don't think that's a very wise decision, but I would say to a certain extent it's still appropriate because I wouldn't nominate either of them as a lead actor because compared to Frances McDormand, they have like relatively low spotlight in that movie. So
yeah.
Just as like a follow-up to that, so does that mean that the filmmakers likely believe that because I assume Best Actor is like a more difficult award to win in general, or Best Actress because that's like the main role. Does that mean that the director or whoever is nominating not the director wouldn't nominate, but like the studio, whoever is putting forward these nominations, they would agree with that assessment? Or is it based on like just chance that they feel like, oh, let's put this person here and let's put that person there?
I think it's literally like, I think that this person is more likely to win Best Picture, or Best Actress, and this one's more likely to win Supporting. So it was like, which is the most lavish role in The Favorite? Okay, Olivia Colman is going in lead actor, she's the queen. She technically doesn't have the most screen time of the movie, but she's playing a queen, so they put her in lead, and you have Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone in Supporting Actress, and as you can see, neither one of them won. And she did. So what does that say about how you categorize people, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Well, in terms of Green Book, in terms of the leading versus supporting, it is in the point of view of the driver, and I think that was a lot of the politicized issue around the film. Is that it's supposed to be about this black pianist, but it's from the angle of his driver. And you're looking at you get to see his personal life and him outside of the building, but you don't get to really get to you don't get a whole lot of intimate moments with what is the supporting actor.
Mm-hmm.
That was my assessment of it. Which is, the family and whatnot after the film said that it wasn't right that it was from the point of view of the white driver versus the pianist who really should have gotten the spotlight in that instance. But
yeah, and I think that was a lot of what the backlash around the win was that you had in particular 2 movies by African American filmmakers nominated for Best Picture this year, and they picked the one made by a white guy who has some very problematic Me Too history and a screenwriter who had made some racially insensitive comments in the past win, and someone like Spike Lee, who's one of the most iconic African American filmmakers ever, not win. And that's not to say that either one of those movies should have won. There were also some really interesting other options, but specifically that particular movie, when there were other more diverse potential winners, was why people were reacting to the movie the win the way they did. Yeah.
I'm just I'll make a broad statement about the Oscars and the awards, and I do wonder what people think about this. That I don't think that movies should win because they're the most diverse, but I do think that I've heard people say that the Oscars isn't a place to be political. I'm just trying to watch a movie, right? But I do think it's almost impossible to. So many of the movies are political, so how can the awards ceremony not be political? It's just, how can you divorce those two things? Because there are so many political messages, especially in recent movies that are coming out. I don't know how you could watch the Green Book and not get a political message from that, or a social message from that. So I guess I wonder if anyone disagrees with me. I really wonder what you envision the award ceremony to be like. How can you discuss a movie like that without it being political when that's kind of the central message of the movie?
Whoever wants to go.
Well, I don't know, I think everybody kind of says that it's political anytime it's not based on like white heterosexual norms. So like, anytime we introduce a diverse cast, or it's a black director or screenwriter, then it is seen as like a political motivation, whereas it's just outside of the norm, so therefore it's then coined political. But personally, I think like it shouldn't be coined, it shouldn't be a specific like political motivation so much as like we should try to lift up artists that have not been given the space before.
Yeah.
I also think there's a major difference between issues politics and like partisan, like specifically to do with like irrelevant, like if you're giving us, like for Green Book, if you want to talk about racial issues during your acceptance speech, like that's like completely logical, and I think most, like even if people were to say, oh, this is too political, like at least there's some merit to like, this is a movie about race, and for me not to comment about race is ignoring like what the whole point of why I made this film. But to just talk about, and this happens all the time unfortunately, just random things that are in the news, like that you're pissed off about, I personally don't think the Oscars is a place for that, because like the professor was saying, like it's not a political rally, it's not a, and it's not that it's not okay that they have those views, it's just like this is a national televised event for everybody.
That's a very good distinction, I think.
Or like Leonardo DiCaprio with like environmental issues. That's a big deal for him, and he's talked about them when he's won, once. But I think there's a major difference there.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, because this is all stemming off of Professor Lowenstein's question, which is what I was hoping to kind of allude to, is when did the Oscars kind of transform from just, you know, this small group of individuals, you know, recognizing merit within their own little circle, within their own community, and then, you know, it becomes a broadcast, a televised event that draws in the viewers, and I think that's when you really see this idea that it's these political messages, you know, and making, you know, movies about more than just physical movies, but about the overall messages, is really because of how large the institution has become and how many millions of people watch and engage with these movies. So like when you look at Black Panther, I remember there was a lot of, I don't want to say controversy, but definitely a lot of discussion when it was first announced that Black Panther was going to be put up for the Best Picture nomination. And I remember people saying, well, it can't be Best Picture, it's a superhero movie, or, you know, yeah, it was good, it was great, but it wasn't, you know, Best Picture worthy. You know, so it's just, you know, it was an idea that maybe it's not artistically the most, you know, refined in certain ways, and, you know, maybe the awards to, you know, costume and sound design would kind of contradict that, but at the same time, just the achievement in the entire art of making a film and the diversity that they created should be awarded something like the Best Picture. And so then on the note of, you know, making them political, it's hard not to feel like when you have such a large audience watching and engaging and tuning into these awards, it's hard not to make these things, you know, more than just these frivolous kind of events, you know, more than just, you know, who wears the most expensive outfit and who, you know, can spend the most money inviting the most guests, and it's hard not to make it more about what's an overall larger message, you know?
Yeah. I was just wondering, have you heard of any backlash from the industry itself for this? I mean, on some level, a diversity quota is being fulfilled, and even if it's being fulfilled because it's something that's not won for a long time, that doesn't mean there's another film which is much more worthy for, but it won't win. There's no possibility. So is there some kind of a backlash from the industry itself? About, you know, you're giving awards just because it's different. If this happened last year, last year's Oscars was a much more identity politics related issue. So I was just wondering, what do the industry people themselves say?
Well, I think that there's been, I was referring to this year as the revenge of the elderly voters, in that it was like this indication of, there is still a very large older voting body who probably thought the Green Book was really, really progressive actually, but a lot less racy. But it's saying, I think within Hollywood, when they talk about, are these movies the best movies of the year? We can have a debate. My personal favorite movie of last year was not nominated for Best Picture. It won Best Animated Film. Freaking love the Spider-Man movie, also technically a superhero movie. So, I think it's really, really subjective in terms of what we all will individually rank as best. And in Hollywood, it's the same level. I think in terms of what you see being pushed forward for Oscars, it's generally speaking movies that the studios felt would be best suited to having a campaign related to awards prestige. And you have new movies like a Black Panther getting in is such a big deal because most of what Hollywood's doing when they're reacting to awards is which of these movies that we're all trying to promote for this period of time do we think is most effective and most powerful in terms of being elevated. But it gets very connected to movies that were being released specifically because the best way for them to make money was to go through the award season. And I think that within the industry there's a bit of an understanding about that. And the Academy, though, freaking hates that because if Black Panther getting nominated is going to help their ratings, but no one in Hollywood actually wants to nominate Black Panther because, that's because it's a superhero movie, or, most people in Hollywood are more focused on something that was, like Roma, that was released for the award season, that kind of thing. And that's part of the motivation of something like popular film category and, where people are mind spaces in terms of what they're choosing and what they're picking. So I think that's part of why you end up with political movies getting pushed forward, things like that, is because they're built for a campaign. And those are the types of movies that production companies think are most likely to be effective during the award season.
I get that thing.
Okay.
So it's, but what I'm trying to ask is the professionals within, I'm talking mostly about the back-end professionals, like movie editing, sound mixing and all that. There's been some kind of a diversity quota fulfillment there too. So are they saying anything regarding that issue? There are like a lot of voters, but for the sound mixing and all the necessary back-end stuff, it's not like only the back-end people are selecting themselves, right? So are they saying anything against this diversity quota fulfillment thing?
I think, there's a debate amongst people in Hollywood, I will say, about if they're adding diversity, does that mean the standards for membership are different than they have been in the past? And what does that mean? And that's a lot of what the conversation is about, is like, is Academy membership still this, like, if it's supposed to be about achievement and we're hitting diversity quotas, I don't agree with this as I'm saying it, then, we've changed the standard for what membership had been previously, except for the standard for membership previously had been white dudes inviting other white dudes because that was who they were bringing up in terms of, how does Hollywood work? Usually people mentoring other people, and there's a tendency for individuals when you're mentoring someone to pick someone who reminds you of yourself. So it turns into generations after generations of white men nurturing white men, nurturing white men. And the Academy is trying to kind of, there was a statement from Cheryl Boone Isaac when they started their kind of quota policy that their behavior had previously been to reflect the industry and that they wanted to attempt to push it in a way that they hadn't previously. And they additionally started what's called the Academy Gold Program, which is designed to provide internships to people of diverse backgrounds into production companies across Hollywood in all areas. So it's talking about, you want to be an editor, you want to be some kind of technician, but there's a program that can help find those positions and nurture new generations of talent. But so there was a marked shift about what their goals were because of the backlash of Oscars So White. Does that answer what you were saying?
Yeah, I understand the film that the different films that are being chosen, I truly believe they deserve to be there. There's nothing wrong about them. It's sometimes it feels like some people are saying that instead of this film, this other film should have gotten in. It's as an artistic perspective way, as a technical perspective way. That's the only thing that I'm saying.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, as you come on to that, actually, I was, like, just correct me if I'm wrong, like, are all the voters, like, kind of related to the entertainment industry in that case? Because this is how they are, like, being elected. So isn't it, like, very politicized if you think about it? Because, like, it's like the general audience are the ones that are watching it. But you don't randomly pick people from the general audience, say from working in business or working in as a chef. So it's a very, the awards, the global award system is very, like this system is very much biased towards people in the entertainment industry and what they think about it. Although sure, they have a professional opinion on what's going on with all the movies, but that, or all the actors, but it doesn't give, say, the normal people to actually think about what the movies or what the actors think, you know? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's like, this is what Hollywood's telling me is important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, to be honest, I've never heard of what Green Book is, to be honest, until today. Until today. And I heard the summary from everyone else here. And then I know that, like, for me, it's like, I know what movies they came out, or what are the good movies that came out. And it's surprisingly, I've never heard Green Book.
Yeah, no, I mean, that definitely says something about the cultural relevance of the ceremony, which I think is what the Academy itself is trying to fight with its own memberships, in terms of what they end up picking versus what's in the best interest of the actual organization in terms of people being interested in the ceremony.
Isn't that very elitist if you think about it?
Yes. Yes, it is very, very elitist, yes. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, because, like, the Hollywood's not, and the Oscars are not the only people having this problem. The Super Bowl had the lowest ratings in, like, 10 years. The game was garbage, but that's a different issue. Like, the Olympics had all-time lows. Like, any sort of big TV spectacle that traditionally, like, either made a lot of money or got a lot of viewers, or both. They've been down. Is there any, like, I doubt this is happening, but is there any, like, talk about, like, this is more of, like, a structural problem and how we're gonna move forward from this, like, from this TV model? Because it's not working anywhere, not just here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the conversation that the Academy is, and the answer is they have no freaking clue and they're trying to figure it out. And that's exactly what this moment is, I think, entirely culturally, is, you know, we're in this, we haven't brought up my comment about, like, Roma being nominated, but this is the first streaming service film to have been, you know, such a major contender that didn't have a distribution, because Amazon has had a couple films, but they had full distribution before they went out. Yeah.
Oh, I was just, that was my comment. You probably have the same one. Okay, I'm blanking again.
I was just gonna say that I think that, like, people don't wanna sit through a full, like, 2-hour, like, I can barely get myself to go to the movies. Like, setting aside 2 hours to go to a movie, it feels like I'm sacrificing a lot or something, like there's some sort of time that I'm losing. So I feel like that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but maybe it's just that people are, like, less willing to watch TV, or, like, also people just don't have cable, or I don't know, like, it's,
You can watch it online, like, it's, there are certain shows that you don't need cable to watch, like, you don't need cable to see the Oscars.
well, yeah, but I'm saying that more people are likely to look at the recap the next day than to watch the full thing. And maybe that's just me, maybe I'm a terrible person, but. Like,
No, I think, like, this ceremony can be really tedious to get through. I mean, that was why it was kind of great that they didn't have a host, because they got rid of a lot of dead airtime when the host comes out into something that's awkward and not funny. Yeah, in the back.
When did award speeches, as they're, like, common, at least in the past couple years I've watched, like, when did award speeches, where, like, you're supposed to be inspirational and, like, meaningful, like, when did that become a thing? Because I feel like that's the thing that people, well, talk about the most afterwards?
I mean, it really depends on the point of time, because there's certainly a clip I didn't feel like I had time to show of, like, Hattie McDaniel was the first African American to win Best Supporting Actress for Gone with the Wind. She gives a really great speech, but you know, the majority of the rest of the awards that year in 1940 was like, oh, thank you, and then just walking off the stage, that kind of thing, because they're at a banquet and it's just like, okay, cool. Or like, them making a snide comment at the presenter who some of their friends with, and then kind of chuckling and then leaving, being like, yay, I have an Oscar. So I think it really comes down to, what do people feel like they want to say in that moment and what it means to them. And I think it has progressively, particularly I think because it's on TV and like the entire world's watching you, like, are you going to you need to say everything. Somehow is, I think, the culture that's come into play. And so even if you're in a category that no one knows anything about, you want to thank everyone who was involved in the award. So you have just a list of names that most people have no idea what you're talking about. But then additionally, a lot of people, like, this is my time, what am I going to do with it? Like this, I'm in front of the entire world. Am I going to just go cool, or am I going to say something that I feel passionately about? And some people go one route, some people are really, really hilarious and delightful, like Olivia Colman, which was my favorite speech of the night. And then some people, make really, really big statements about something they feel passionately about. Yeah.
After Eddie Redmayne won the best actor for his performance in Theory of Everything, I started to suspect a general trend in the Oscars that the academies might be favoring toward actors that act in biographical or historical movies, like Matthew McConaughey in the previous year in Dallas Buyers Club, and then Lincoln, yeah, in the previous year. So I was wondering if this might be a potential issue, that it's too obvious that the Academy might be favoring a certain genre of films that might kill off diversity in following years.
I mean, it's sort of like, what do people think is good acting? And sometimes it's something like, oh, well, Matthew McConaughey lost a bunch of weight, and we hook him and put on a fake nose, and they're all playing historical figures, but it's like, oh, it was transformative. That must be really, really good acting. And there may be other styles of acting that are also very good that won't get much recognition or notice. But there are certainly, I think, preconceived notions that often come into play with what ends up winning. And there are definitely certain types, like historical figures. We know what Lincoln was like. Oh, he did a really good job of being Lincoln from what my understanding of Lincoln is. So that must be really, really good acting. As opposed to, oh, they just made up a character and I don't know who they are, so I guess that was really good, but I know what Lincoln is, Yeah.
Well, is that kind of like the Oscar bait stereotype of a, sweeping historical film with some sort of a social message? Is that basically the gist of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's arguments for what awards bait is, which are movies that are designed basically to attempt to win Oscars. And at different points in history, I think it changes in terms of what gets won. I know that the 1970s were a lot of the movies go into being much more contemporary issue films, or even like bigger statement films, that kind of thing. But it can depend on the particular cultural moment and what the industry is particularly targeting for distribution, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I did want to ask, sort of tangentially, about the second point on Roma and Netflix's campaign. I read an article the other day that detailed that they had hired onto their team some woman who's notoriously hard campaigner. And the article mentioned something about how she had been under the tutelage of Harvey Weinstein while he was still sort of running his own campaigns, and that he had somehow turned campaigning for Oscars into a blood sport when it otherwise wasn't. And that comment in particular, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. What does it mean that he ushered in some new era of these?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of what I mentioned when I brought up Shakespeare in Love. But I mean, he was someone who realized the potential for essentially buying movies cheap on the market, or at film festivals or something, and then distributing them based entirely on an awards campaign and then winning and making a ton of money off of that. That like this is the power of what awards season can do and how I can make money. And he kind of took that level of campaigning to a new extreme, especially in the height of things in the 90s, like targeting voters individually in order to be successful and things like that. So in that respect, I mean, he was someone who, like, that was what he did. He picked movies so they could go through award season, and that was how most of his movies made money and were successful. So it was half like, let's make money, and half of it was like, we're gonna produce the prestige films, and we're gonna know the system better than anybody else. So someone who'd worked for him, like, that was what the goal of Miramax was, and that was what the goal of the Weinstein Company was, in terms of just what did he do and what did his companies do, that kind of thing.
So was it different before? Like, would you say that there wasn't as much, like, because it does seem like sometimes, at least in filmmaking, people go absolutely crazy. Like, at least in LA, which makes sense, but also you see all the, like, for your consideration posters. And I know you mentioned earlier in the talk that it is ultimately, it's just an award that started out as a PR venture. So, I mean, was there ever really a time where it didn't, like, how, was it a gradual process of it getting to such a commercialized cutthroat?
I think the level of cutthroat hit new heights in the 1990s, but it was also sort of, there were additional structures that were put in place during that same period. One of the things and this is something I'm still trying to figure out to answer your question in terms of like, what do I do in my research, what am I writing about? So in the 1990s, this kind of same time as the rise of Miramax, you see the SAG Awards first begin, which was 1993 or 1994. And additionally, the BAFTA Awards, which previously had been kind of in the summer after the Academy Awards and kind of this irrelevant event, moves their event to before the Oscars. And suddenly you have these two really big tentpoles emerge as signifiers. And so previously you've had some big awards like the Directors Guild, but they're not that relevant because they're just a specific, much more specific, less high profile group of people, Screenwriters Guild, and they could predict things, but you weren't gonna have a bunch of celebrities running around at them. In the SAG Awards, you've got, you know, every actor who's gonna be at the Oscars, being totally glamorous, so you don't just have the Golden Globes and the Oscars, you have suddenly 4 ceremonies that are a big deal as a precursor. So it kind of facilitated a new level of extreme, I think, than had ever been previously seen in terms of just how many high profile events there were that were in place. The ramifications of that is something that I'm trying to track and figure out for my dissertation. And I'm not there yet, but this is what I do with my time in terms of trying to figure out and look at ads and stuff like that.
That's really cool. So I think that's a good place to end. It is 8 o'clock, so I know we said we were going to end then. If you have more questions, I'm sure Monica will be willing to answer them. But thank you so much for coming. And I just, if you filled one of these out, just go ahead and leave it, or give it to me right now. And if you're interested in hearing more about our events and you didn't fill one of these out, then just come get one from me. And thank you so much for coming, and have a great night. Thank you.